Gordon. Thanks for having me this morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, very good.
All right, beautiful. Look, before navigating identity and integrity, I'd like to acknowledge the rich culture and history of the Palawapakana people, the custodians of the unceded land upon which I live and work, and I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So just as a quick introduction, I'm also a youth health nurse and counsellor and hold that space on the HREC in Tassie at the University of Tasmania. I'm also a neonatal and paediatric ICU nurse in a unit that proudly engages and leads the way in significant research for that vulnerable cohort. It was through doing a master's in that space that led me, and seeing the research and treatment in the NICU that led me to Monash, where I've had the great privilege of doing a master's in bioethics, finally focusing on gender and gender affirming care. So today I'd briefly like to take us back to some very important fundamentals in research ethics, gender and legislation, as these often can be lost in the complexity of research deliberations and in fact even in our lives. I've so appreciated the other presentations. They've been fantastic, and I hope as I speak some excellent points that were made by other presenters come to mind. So a bit more lightly today, I'm going to start by sharing with you the talented and transgender Wachowski sisters who've made some fascinating movies, including The Matrix. As I'm passionate about ethics and pondering ethical thought experiments, I'll use this pop culture reference for that purpose. In a dystopian future, these sisters present machines that forced humanity into totally isolated, sealed and individualised pods. They live in these pods from birth to death, where their consciousness is kept in a simulated replica of our society, the Matrix. But let's say that a child's born and put into one of these pods, but the machines forget to plug the child in. They grow and mature inside their pod, totally isolated from any human knowledge until they're in their teens. Then one day the machine notices and reconnects the child to the Matrix. Suddenly the child is given consciousness and thrust into our world, a 15-year-old with no experience of human, culture or society. They wouldn't know anything about vehicles, food, right or wrong, or how they should be, all those attributes that develop through social conditioning. If this child was then asked if they were a boy or a girl, what would they say or how would they know, and how might they present themselves? So I'll leave you with that and continue. As a HREC member, I understand that we endeavour to respect, represent and protect all people in the research community. But as we are working in a privileged and elitist academic and research environment, at times we can overlook the fact that research is undertaken can be on the back of vulnerable people who are not always given this recognition in the national statement. As such, we must ensure research is considered and conducted in a manner that has complete integrity. The national statement uses a definition of integrity that includes the expectation that the research community follow recognised principles of research conduct, which include respect and complying with relevant legislation, policies and guidelines. If these principles are followed, it would lead to lowering barriers and increasing the opportunity of inclusion of all people in human research. However, often unintentionally or otherwise, they're not. The concept of integrity in the human condition is actually quite interesting, ethically speaking, as it is a marker of how we can treat others, but more importantly, how we can exist within ourselves. To exhibit integrity means one has the quality of having strong moral or ethical principles. More importantly, integrity also means the state of experiencing wholeness or living with coherence, and this can be impacted by the actions of others. Therefore, HRECs, research institutions and researchers need to act with integrity to ensure that the integrity of the participant is honoured. So how does this affect the trans community? In addition to the daily global, social and political assaults, it's been my experience that transgender and gender diverse people can be attacked or misunderstood in the ethics committee space. This needs to be addressed by recognising the wholeness of transgender and gender diverse people, and we must ensure we're doing all we can to engage with and protect those people who do not fit into the normative gender binary. This can start with educating ourselves so we're not transphobic or worse, transmesic, and can hold space for these humans.
Leonie, just very quickly, are you sharing slides here?
Oh God.
That's okay. That's okay. Just press the green. There's a green thing in the bottom of the screen, and just press that.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's not showing me.
It's in your toolbar on the bottom.
There it is. I didn't have the whole one up. So you've missed a few, but that's okay.
It's okay. Just go to where...
You missed my pod picture. That's all right. So anyway, let's go back a bit. So sorry about that, people. There is confusion around the concepts of sex and gender, and many people do not think about it because they do not need to, but sex does not equal gender. To clarify, and as we've heard, this may be helped by the thought experiment, and a person's sex is the body and gender is the brain, our consciousness. Sex is determined by physical characteristics, and in Australia, this is recorded at birth. This can be female, male, or for some, intersex. However, gender is a social construct and is effectively described by the ABS as being determined by social and cultural differences in identity, expression, and experience. What we need to understand is that gender of humans is found on a spectrum and is completely individual. Those who are not experiencing at either end of the spectrum, being wholly transgender, a cis woman or a cis man, can be non-binary, gender diverse or fluid, or nothing at all based on their experience. They may use they, them pronouns, combination of they, she, he, or nothing at all except their name. They may use neo-pronouns, of which there are now many, and these are at times as unique as the humans themselves. Many, including those in the research space, say that today's gender expression is too complicated or counselling. They can't wrap their heads around it, yet they manage the complexities of different methodologies, data management, or the ethical discussions that research requires. This tells me it isn't about comprehension, but about considerations of respect and compassion. The national statement states that research by its very nature is a practice where investigation is undertaken to gain knowledge and understanding. For research applicants, it is a great privilege to have the opportunity to conduct any human research, but with this comes immense responsibility. This is especially true when the participants are vulnerable and marginalised. Transgender and gender diverse individuals almost universally experience stigmatisation and as such degrees of trauma perpetrated by the people around them and society itself. Securing their recognition, inclusion in research and cultivating gender inclusive language at an institutional level can validate their humanness, their presence in our communities, and add a richness to research that can only be of benefit. Ignoring this risk, creating barriers for participation and extending the time it will take for greater social acceptance. At this point, I know many would say this applies to any group of people experiencing similar marginalisation, and it's true. As such, intersectionality is highly prevalent in this space and should always be sitting firmly in the front of our minds as we deliberate the merits and methodology of applications. For this, we can look at some approaches in feminist ethics. Because of feminism, we recognise that women remain the largest disadvantaged group of people globally, and they will remain so while we marginalise any other group of people. Because of feminism, we understand that it is a value system that subjugates and it does not discriminate between those it targets. Because of feminism, we understand that the rejection of one group of humans will always mean that any other group can experience the same, and without a doubt, we witness this marginalised and reprehensible othering every day. And because of feminism, we understand that humanity has no hierarchy. Intersectional oppression is an interlocking system that needs vibrant, inquiring minds to challenge it at all times. Barring maybe a few, gender diverse people have experienced some of their life living in a state that is not coherent and unified. The binary nature of gender normativity has caused challenges for those who do not identify at either end of the spectrum. In fact, gender normativity is more common than we think, especially as the current positive conversation and legislation around this recognises that a vast array of experiences are valid, but these can also cause feelings of loneliness and marginalisation. We in the research community can mediate some of this unacceptable human pain through ensuring that we are leading the charge by seeing them and ensuring their inclusion at the very beginning of our new research ideas and inquiry. Sadly, there is a passionate and destructive push against the human considerations and needs of transgender and gender diverse people. With it comes significant and negative impacts of policy, legislation, and moral positions that deny recognition and care and decreases the safety for those who are gender diverse. Hundreds of pieces of legislation in many countries are evolving or have been enacted, denying the essential nature of gender and how these humans should or should not be respected, represented, and protected. In fact, in Australia at this time, our transgender and gender diverse community is partially protected by legislation and receives some support for their experience. but is still not enough to routinely secure their safety or to ensure they are treated with compassion and integrity in many spaces, including research and within the academic community. There was a recent review of the national statement, which in interim noted the presence of transgender in a very small and I would argue highly disrespectful way in a footnote in chapter 4. The newly released national statement continues to exclude them simply through language that could have been made more gender neutral, especially when throughout there is often no need for gender to be referred to at all. In the review, the national statement indicates it does not support exclusion, yet the footnote itself was othering and excluded certain human experiences that we must acknowledge require extra consideration. It reads, among these values, respect is central. It involves recognising that each human being has value in himself or herself, and this value must inform all interaction between people. The use of themselves would have been more compassionate and inclusive, less wordy, and certainly more accurate. The reality is gender diverse people do not seek to be special, but to have their value recognised as an integral condition of gender normativity. And by maintaining language that is gender specific and binary, they continue to be marginalised in a manner that is unacceptable in the space and should be looking forward and challenging societal norms. Language itself should be used to fit in around us as we change, something that has happened over millennia. And this should apply to the documents we use. As the national statement provides little direction and has been mentioned, we need to look to other resources to clarify and enhance how we consider appropriate inclusion of gender in research. And it may be that committees have not thought of these lately. First, the Sex Discrimination Act and its 2013 amendment would be helpful if considering transgender and gender diverse people, would be disadvantaged by the research application or the research itself. There is always a potential for an application to be found discriminatory if the way it is structured disadvantages or excludes a gender diverse person. This could be through direct or indirect discrimination, and through the approval of this particular application, the institutions may be viewed unfavourably if the research has been exclusionary. Inclusive language in the applications, in the study advertising that seeks applicants, or in the questionnaires should align with the principles of this Act, and HREC should be carefully reviewing that these are being followed. Another resource to consider is the Standard for Sex, Variations of Sex Characteristics and Sexual Orientation Variables, which is a highly useful document. It provides guidance on language, and it specifically states that a recommended element of questionnaires is to use gender neutral language. I've often noticed at times there have been questionnaires and applications that have had gender as a question, but I personally could see no sound scientific reason for this to be asked at all. Oftentimes, applicants simply being people would suffice if gendered information was not being used for the proposed research. The Australian Guideline on Recognition of Sex and Gender is useful when considering how to make language and data collection practices and research protocols more inclusive. While this applies to the Australian government agencies, the use of data and information is not terribly different, and these principles can inform us as to whether collection of gender information is achieved in a manner necessary for what the research intends. It could be argued that we ask for gender so that we know how to address someone, but in the context of gender diversity, this no longer applies. There are other state and institutional legislation, institutional legislation and policy, and I'd suggest having a champion of gender inclusion who is knowledgeable regarding these would be beneficial to every HREC. Recently, new guidance that has come to my attention. These are the Statement on Sex, Gender, Variations of Sex Characteristics and Sexual Orientation in Health and Medical Research from the NHREC, and new guidelines for capturing trans people in research from the University of Melbourne, which has been presented on Friday the 8th. It is promising that work is being done to support researchers in how they can best be gender inclusive. However, it remains concerning that we continue to separate these documents from what is taken as the whole national statement, and this should be rectified in the future. For now, I'm hopeful these documents will be sought out and will respect the voices of the trans community that only ask for respect and equity. The research community have the opportunity, and I would argue the ethical imperative of being the change. And for now, this starts with guidelines such as these. If they are what we have, and aren't created and presented well, then the outcomes at the other end of relevant research won't be indicative of human truths that could decrease marginalisation and disparities in political, health and social considerations. My final thought. We return to our humans growing in their matrix pods with their consciousness directed by machines intending to enforce the desired societal norms. For these people, there is no room for them being able to express themselves authentically or safely. Currently, this applies in our society too. Forward-thinking research and academic communities should be leading the way in accepting variations in gender that make each individual unique and recognise just how we can shape the future of gender normativity. As I've pointed out, it's intersectionality that matters, and throughout history, research on the most marginalised groups has been undertaken without sound ethical values of integrity and compassion. The national statement is often taken as absolute, and as has been noted, it needs to be guidance. When it is taken as absolute, we must ask how many humans are being excluded due to challenges that we would all be willing to overcome. Ideally, there would be such acceptance that transgender and gender diverse people and their experiences are considered simply another thread that makes the tapestry of humanity so interesting. These people deserve the same representation and respect in the ethical deliberations regarding human research that we give to all people. And at least this should be bound into one document because addendums are not enough. As is noted in the national statement, respect for human beings is the common thread through all the discussions of ethical values. Turning to it as the final value is a reminder that draws together all of the ethical deliberation that has preceded it. It is imperative that the research community acts in a manner that gives these words meaning, or for transgender and gender diverse humans, they will remain just that, words. Thank you. Sorry about the screen sharing.
Yeah, just if you stop sharing, all good.
Yep.
Well, Leonie,
sorry.
That was a tour de force through intersectionality. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I got a little nervous.
No,
but that's
no. It was really well delivered, and I think it's a great reminder of the need to. I think, as Philomena said earlier, we start from the basis of being inclusive as possible. We don't start trying to exclude people. We start trying to include everyone, and go from there. I think we could, I'm sure many people online could, the point you made about having gender as a question in the surveys for no apparent reason, really resonates. And I often wonder why such questions are there. And finally, I think taking the national statement as absolute is, it's not the best way to keep your mind open to the possibilities, I think. So I think that was a really good reminder. I don't have any questions for you. Let me just see if there's one there. It might not be. No, but some very good comments for you there, Leonie.
Thank you.
No, really useful and very consistent with the theme of this morning and yesterday. So thank you very much for your time.